Three tomatoes are walking down the street. Papa tomato, mama tomato, and baby tomato.
Playing Catch-Up presents.
Starring Lindsay Hinkle and Jamie Nelson.
So this is Playing Catch-Up, is it? I prefer something with a little more kick.
Everybody's favorite condiment-themed entertainment podcast.
Put some hot sauce on my burrito, baby!
Hot sauce.
Nobody puts ketchup on a hot dog.
And you are listening to Hot Sauce on PlayingCatchupPodcast.com. This month we are talking about academic subjects. I'm Jamie Nelson, and with me my co-host, Lindsay Hinkle.
You know what movie I watched the other day?
What movie did you watch the other day, Lindsay?
Little Women.
How was it?
It was wonderful.
So if you got to write a novel based on your life, which parts would you change?
Oh man, I don't know how to make this funny and not sad. Like in the book Little Women, you know how the sisters have their little club in the attic where they do plays and all that?
Yeah.
My sister and I had something kind of similar. I was really into the TV news.
Like news programs?
Well, I wasn't like into them, but I wanted to be on them.
So you wanted to be an anchor or you wanted to be arrested?
I wanted to be an anchor, Jamie. Or a weather girl. Come on. My mom got me this Mr. Microphone, and I would make her sit down and make these news broadcasts with me. In return, she had this dream of being a rock star. And she would stand on the couch with a broom and use it as a guitar. And I had to dance and scream and pretend that I was the crowd of fans. And if I stopped dancing, she'd hit me with the broom.
It's the strangest household ever.
It's not that different from Little Women. Come on.
Yeah, because everybody remembers Jo standing on a couch whacking her sisters with a broom. I would love to hear this story from Liv's point of view, because she was all like, rock star, punk rock, yeah. And then my sister had this microphone, and she used to dress up in a blazer and make like it's raining outside and start pointing at a green wall, saying, look at the clouds coming in from the north.
Okay, Jamie, you are not that far off, so please stop. So seriously, books.
Books. I love books. I was an English major.
So who do we have in the Skype studio today?
Today we're going on a journey back in time to the 1800s in Concord, Massachusetts. With us on this journey is Susan Cheever, author of over a dozen books, including American Bloomsbury and most recently Louisa May Alcott, a personal biography. Susan, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
All right, so I have a confession. I've been a Henry David Thoreau nerd for a long time, but I've always taken his work and his life in isolated context. And it wasn't until reading American Bloomsbury that I really got to see him through other people's eyes. And I'm wondering, for our listeners who have not read the book yet, if you could talk a little bit about what is the big deal about this time period in Concord and who are some of the key players.
Well, it was really Thoreau who got me going in the first place. I had been asked to write an introduction to a new edition of Little Women, a paperback edition. And I thought, okay, I'll reread Little Women. So I reread Little Women, which is, by the way, a great novel. And then I read a couple, I started reading biographies of Louisa May Alcott. And I came to a biography that told me that Laurie, the wonderful man in Little Women, was based on Henry David Thoreau. And of course, that turns out to be only marginally true, but I was stunned. I had no idea that Louisa May Alcott lived across the street from Ralph Waldo Emerson and Henry David Thoreau. That, I just hadn't made the connection between the Concord of Beth and Amy and Jo and the Concord of Emerson and Thoreau and the rest of them. So I became fascinated, and it became clear to me the more I read about Concord in the 1840s and 50s and 60s that it was a sort of magnet for literary talent. It really was the nexus of American literary talent, and it wasn't just Henry David Thoreau and Ralph Waldo Emerson and Louisa May Alcott and Bronson Alcott, her father, and Margaret Fuller, their friend, but it was also Nathaniel Hawthorne and a great many other people who came through. And it's one of those, what historians call this is a genius cluster. It's one of those times in history when a great many brilliant people seem to come together at the same place at the same time. I mean, another genius cluster, of course, is Washington, Jefferson, Hamilton, our founding fathers. That was a genius cluster.
Sure.
So, but this genius cluster particularly interested me because it's a literary genius cluster. These people were all writers, and, Emerson was friends with Whitman. I mean, it came to seem that almost every American writer of the 19th century had come through Concord at some time or another. So I was fascinated by that.
Yeah, and I was fascinated when I read that too, because I think anybody who has taken English in high school and college is going to know most of those names, but I don't think everyone realizes that they all hung around together, and often in the same house.
I have to say that's partly because the women have been trivialized. In other words, I was an American Studies major, and I didn't know this. I was an American Studies major at Brown University, and I didn't know this. Because nobody taught me Louisa May Alcott and Margaret Fuller when they taught me Emerson and Thoreau and Whitman. It wouldn't have occurred to them. And so I think that's part of the reason it's such a pleasant surprise, is that the women in this group just hadn't really been focused on. And of course, when you add the women to the mix, it gets much more interesting.
Sure, oh, definitely.
What is it about Louisa May Alcott that drew you to her more than any of the other characters?
She had then and has now tremendous power, both as a writer and as an icon. I mean, many, many powerful women today, from Gloria Steinem to Hillary Clinton to Christiane Amanpour, will tell you that when they read about Jo March in Little Women, that was the moment at which they realized that they could do what they had dreamed of doing. That they didn't have to become Little Miss Prisses or Niminy Piminy Chits, as Jo March calls them. And so it's a tremendously powerful book for women of my generation and generations who are, younger and older. And that really interests me. I mean, in a lot of ways, Jo March is the force behind this very, very brilliant and dazzling first wave of feminists in professions and in politics. So that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. Was she a transcendentalist like a lot of her neighbors, or no?
Well, you have to define transcendentalist.
Oh gosh, how would you define it?
Well, transcendentalism, this wasn't a word that they used at the time, mind you. It's a word that scholars have slapped on them. But it's a kind of belief in intuition and nature rather than in the old Calvinist God. It's really a shift away from religion towards humanism. And so, Louisa certainly was more of a humanist than a churchgoer, and she certainly was a transcendentalist in the sense that she was there. She just is never thought of as a transcendentalist because all the transcendentalists are generally thought to be men.
I see.
What do you think is going to be the most surprising thing in the Louisa May Alcott biography for your readers? Or maybe you don't want to give that away.
I guess we shouldn't give it away, whatever it is. I think it's very surprising to people that she didn't want to write Little Women.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's very surprising to people that she was a Civil War nurse. I think it's very surprising to people that there were four sisters who were very much like the March Girls, but not really. I think there are all kinds of surprising things.
Yeah, great. Well, it would be a surprising book. In this time and place, it seemed to be common for people to change their names, like Lydia became Lydian, David Henry became Henry David. Do you know if this was fashionable at the time out of it was symbolic of something or rebellious against something? Or
it doesn't seem to me. I certainly know people in the 21st century in New York City who've changed their names.
Sure.
I'm not sure that it's characteristic of the Concord group. But you could argue, I mean, Bronson Alcott changed his name. You could argue that it was a time of reinvention. It was a time of kind of focus on the individual and the idea that, you know, manifest destiny, the idea that each of us control our fate, and that changing your name would be part of that, would be part of inventing yourself. You could argue that. I just am not sure. Those are three examples of name changes.
Yeah.
What's your real name?
My real name is Jamie.
They named you Jamie.
Yes.
Well, often Jamie is short for something.
Yeah. They spelled it J. Well, like the French J apostrophe A-I-M-E is Jem, so they just spelled it without the apostrophe.
Okay. Well, so it's the same spirit of invention.
Yeah, and I guess sometimes when I write with J and then my middle name, which is Lee. So I guess trying to show a different face.
Right.
What kind of relationship did these people have with Concord?
Well, I think they all had different relationships to it. In other words, Ralph Waldo Emerson, who started it all, chose Concord. He went there. He bought a big house. He married a woman who would be a partner to him, more than a lover. And then he started inviting people to come. And he invited Nathaniel Hawthorne, who didn't have enough money to get married and live in a house, and Emerson offered him a house. And he invited the Alcotts, who also didn't have enough money, and they came, and he invited Margaret Fuller. In other words, most of the people that we think of as the Transcendentalists were essentially Ralph Waldo Emerson's house guests. So he had that relationship to Concord. He had chosen it, and he became its sort of leader, its sort of grand literary man, whereas Louisa May Alcott was taken there as a child willy-nilly. She didn't have any choice about it. So it's a very different, each of them had and Henry David Thoreau grew up there. He came from a Concord family. So I think all of them had very different relationships to it.
And in your book, you said that you had gone to Concord and felt a little disappointed at first, seeing that it is so modern compared to sort of the Concord in our heads when we read about it from the 1800s.
Right. Well, I had done a lot of reading about the Alcotts and the Emersons and Thoreau and the Hawthornes, and somehow I had forgotten that was the 19th century and this is the 21st century. So very stupidly, I loaded my children and dogs into the car and drove to Concord, expecting to get out of the car and find, you know, the Mill Dam as it was in 1851, or the Middlesex Hotel where the Alcotts checked in when they first went there to be as it was. And of course, we went in the middle of August. It was boiling hot. The town was mobbed with tourists. There was nowhere to park. The children were unhappy. The dogs were unhappy. It was sort of a disaster. And I thought, well, that Concord that I have fallen in love with doesn't exist anymore. And then I'm not even sure why. I kept going back anyway. I think I had something else to do in Boston, and I thought, well, I'll just stay in Concord. And then the second and third and fourth time I went back, it began to seem more and more like, it is tremendously like the Concord of 1851, but especially in the winter. And especially, you know, if you go to the right places that haven't been changed. So it turned out that first impression was something I could put aside, because many other times, even with the children and the dogs, I went back to Concord many, many times. And most of the times I did see the old Concord, the Concord I had fallen in love with. But it was just that first time was sort of a disaster.
When you said it was mobbed by tourists, is it mostly people looking for the history?
Yes. It's a very high level of tourists. I don't mean that we were tourists as well.
Sure.
It was just mobbed. There was nowhere to park. It was crowded. You know, there was no, we couldn't find anything cold to drink. Everybody wanted to use a bathroom. It was just a disaster.
Wow. I do plan to get to Concord someday. I just don't have a car, and I'd love to see Walden Pond at some point. I don't think mass transit goes there.
I think it does.
Does it?
I think there's a bus that goes down. Where do you live?
New Jersey, but I can easily get to, like, Boston by bus.
I'm sure there's a way to get down to Route 2, which is all you need. Then you can walk into Walden Pond.
Oh, yeah, it's a couple miles, isn't it? Or
yeah, but it's not that far.
No. So, what is your favorite anecdote from this time? For anyone who's like, oh, Concord 1800 sounds like a boring history lesson, what story would you tell them to make them listen up?
Well, I guess I would tell them that it was a group of people who, like any other group of people, were torn apart and pushed together by their loves and hatreds. I mean, what I did was I sort of added the gossip. I mean, for instance, Emerson, Hawthorne and Sophia Peabody, to whom he was engaged, couldn't afford to get married, and so Emerson, who thought that Hawthorne was very talented, although nobody else did at the time, invited Hawthorne to come and live in a house called the Old Manse, which was an Emerson family house. Emerson invited Margaret Fuller to come and stay at the Emerson house, and Margaret Fuller had something going on with Hawthorne, and so there was a lot of walking back and forth from one house to the other, and at one point Emerson came upon Margaret Fuller and Nathaniel Hawthorne sort of lying in the grass. And pretty quickly after that, Emerson took his house back and told Hawthorne and Sophia that they had to find somewhere else to live.
Scandalous.
And essentially he kicks them out of Concord.
Oh.
Now, was that cause and effect? I think so.
Mm-hmm.
But, that's the kind of historical anecdote that when you put it in context, it suddenly comes alive.
Yeah, they don't teach you that in English class.
No, they don't.
So, people can find you on SusanCheever.com.
They can.
What do you have coming up? I saw that you have a reading on May 17th at the 92nd Y for your father, John Cheever. So that's coming up in May?
Yes, it's coming up in May.
May 2012.
Exactly, 2012. I'm writing a biography of E.E. Cummings.
Oh, very nice.
So that's what I'm mostly working on. It's going to be a Knopf Pantheon book.
Ah, very nice.
Louisa May Alcott it's just coming out in paperback.
Okay, everybody should go out and pick that one up.
They certainly should. Or they can get it as an ebook.
Ah, it's on Kindle and everything?
Sure.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining me, Susan.
Okay, Jamie, thanks.
Great to talk to you. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This has been Hot Sauce, brought to you by PlainKetchupPodcast.com. Please subscribe, rate, and comment on iTunes. Check back every Monday for a new celebrity guest interview. You may also want to check out our hilarious Wednesday videos on youtube.com/PlainKetchup. That's PlainKetchup. Sign up for our newsletter on PlainKetchupPodcast.com to be entered into our monthly drawings. We give away t-shirts, music, stickers, and more from our guests. Please like us on Facebook.com/PlainKetchup and follow us on Twitter @PlainKetchup. Don't forget to support this project by buying Plain Ketchup swag at our Cafe Press store. Have a question? Email Jamie and Lindsay at gmail.com. That's JAIME and LINDSEY @gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Stay saucy. And you are listening to Hot Sauce on PlainKetchupPodcast.com.
This month's intro sounds a lot like, we're Delilah.
I was trying to sound sophisticated.
You think sophisticated, I think Delilah.